First of all, welcome. I think that I speak on behalf of all of Songtrust that we're just completely humbled by the number of folks that have registered and are tuning in today from all over the world. It's pretty humbling to see. Carl and I are obviously meeting virtually, as you can clearly see. I'm in Los Angeles. Carl, are you in Philadelphia or Newark today?
I am in Newark today.
Got it. Okay. Well, hello from Newark. I don't know if you can hear anything in the background. I'm in Los Angeles and someone seems to be mowing a lawn. In any event, wanted to quickly acknowledge that we are on the traditional territory and homelands of the Chumash, Tongva, Kizh, Munsee Lenape, and Lenni Lenape groups. I apologize if I mispronounced anything, who historically occupied LA and Philadelphia. And I guess with no further ado, I'm going to switch to the next slide, please. Okay, so from this slide, you could probably gather that I'm Alex Gershwin. I'm the Associate Director of Business Development at Songtrust. I've been on staff at Songtrust for about 3.5 years, but have been in the publishing sector for over 10 years. I began my career at a company called Rights Flow in New York City, which was a mechanical licensing company. Was there for a couple of years before moving out to the West Coast in 2011, and first found work as a music coordinator for an independent music supervisor in Silver Lake in Los Angeles, and then transitioned over to a sync licensing sales role at a production music library that was owned by indie publisher Olé, which is now called Anthem Entertainment, and then wound up at ASCAP for several years, where I functioned as an in-house publisher services specialist within the global services team, pretty much being the in-house guy for several of the largest music publishers in the world, and also fielding dozens of inquiries and calls every single day, took thousands of calls cumulatively from music creators all over the world. And that provided me with a really interesting vantage point into the world of Songtrust and the music publishing business overall. So with that, I'm going to kick it to Carl and allow him to introduce himself as well.
Yes, my name is Carl Folks. I am the managing partner of the Folks firm. We're based in the New York City area. I'm a Jersey guy through and through, from South Jersey, now up in North Jersey. My practice, we represent songwriters, producers, record labels, pub companies, everything in between. We put out a lot of education, in the past, done workshops. In addition to that, I am a music business professor at Drexel University. Drexel University, I teach classes in copyright law, music publishing, hip hop culture, all those things. So, I'm really excited to be here, and it's going to be a fun session.
Cool. Let's go to the next slide. All right. So the topic of conversation today, we're going to be talking about publishing deals. Specifically, we're going to be delving into the LOMO method, right? So the agreement length that is best for you, various delivery requirements or obligations that the agreement requires, monetary considerations, including things like royalty rates, advance funds, repayment requirements, and other factors to consider there. And then interestingly enough, I saw that the vast majority of those that registered today are really interested in the concept of ownership and how it relates to the publishing business. So we'll be talking about that as well. Next slide, please. Okay, so these are some of the types of music publishing deals that you will hear discussed over the course of your career path. And 360 deals, co-pub deals, admin deals, work for hire deals, and exclusive songwriter agreements. Carl, I probably need your help here with 360 deals. Seldom times do I ever encounter them, but my understanding is they're basically, a record label, if they're doing a 360 deal, they're basically entitling themselves to collect revenue from multiple revenue streams, including publishing. Could you shed a little bit more light on that, please?
Yeah, 360, just think of a full circle, right? So not just the master recording royalties that a record label might normally get. We're talking about merch. We're talking about music publishing. We're talking about touring, sponsorships, all income. Whatever company that is offering you that 360 deal, they're trying to eat from the full circle of entertainment income. So that's really the basis of a 360.
Cool. And then you got your co-publishing deals, and I guess to do a side-by-side between co-pub and exclusive songwriter agreement. So co-publishing I guess usually what you see, right, is that would entail a songwriter retaining usually like 50% of their publishing interest in their catalog or in specific compositions, and then the other 50% is being assigned to a publisher. Is that right?
Yeah, I would say that's right. And I think where it gets a little bit confusing is the splits are more 75-25, right? So the co-pub, when you think about ownership is 50-50. However, your performance royalties, your 100% of your writer share is still going to you. They're taking 50% of your publisher share. Mechanical royalties usually 75-25. Covers, syncs usually around 75-25. So even though you see 50-50 ownership change, normally the royalties are around 75-25 in your favor.
And how does that differ from an exclusive songwriter agreement that you may have with the publisher?
Yeah, exclusive songwriter agreement with the publisher, they might have those are a bit interesting because they can be like, kind of full publishing agreements, or they can be just, hey, we'll take a 50-50 ownership and we'll split everything down the middle. But a co-pub, you're talking about that 75-25%. And normally there's going to be a bigger advance in money involved in that co-pub compared to that, I think, that exclusive songwriter agreement.
Cool. And going back up to the top fields here with administration deals. So Songtrust is obviously a publishing administrator, but there are different types of administrators that provide services that are more in line with traditional publishers. We'll speak a little bit more of that in the slides to come, and I don't want to jump ahead of things. So I'm just going to go quickly to work for hires, which you commonly see in like the film production world. If you're somebody like a Hans Zimmer potentially, or somebody who's composing music for a Disney animated film, oftentimes they're commissioning somebody, they're fronting them a fair amount of money up front to compose score for a movie or a TV show or something. And in exchange for doing the deal, they actually retain 100% ownership of the copyright. A lot of folks that are writing those work for hire or subject to work for hire agreements are still able to collect writer share royalties through their PROs, but they basically, and Carl, maybe more insight into this, but they're basically like don't have any say over how those copyrights may be used or licensed. Is that correct?
Yeah, I would say so. I think, again, it kind of depends on, I think, the money given for a particular song. I think, the more money a company's giving you, the more likely they'll want a bigger say. That's kind of the rule of thumb.
Cool. Next slide, please. And we're going to get into the real meat and potatoes, is what I said earlier, of what this chat is all about. So the LOMO strategy: length, obligation, money, and ownership. And so, Carl, one of the things that I focus on quite a bit, and I'm hoping for your insight here, is, it's when to do the deal. It's when it makes sense to do a deal. And before you can even use the LOMO method, do you feel that there's ever a situation in which or during which a songwriter shouldn't even consider entering into a publishing deal at all? Like it may be premature, or they're just not ready for other reasons that may factor into their consideration. Can you shine a little bit of light on that?
Yeah, I think that's such a great thing to sort of highlight too, just because I think oftentimes a songwriter might not even be ready for the opportunity that might happen, or it might just be too soon. You might not know how to take advantage of the opportunity. The deal might be bad. That just could be a straight up fact. So I think oftentimes, you want to sort of build up some leverage. You want to, get good at your craft. I don't think the best time to sign, even though other people might tell you different, is after sort of one viral moment. You might get the most money at that time, but it's all about long term and thinking 10 years down the line. Yep.
So, but not to play devil's advocate here, I don't mean for this to sound like an interrogation, right? But so is the suggestion then that you want to have some level of activity, you want to build up enough credits so that you can go to the negotiation table with more leverage and perhaps I don't know, maybe you'll be able to negotiate something more advantageous. Like, don't you run the risk if you have that viral moment and then you kind of fall off the map that the deal gets worse potentially?
Yeah, that's always a potential. And like that's why I always say there's no such thing as a perfect deal. You kind of got to take you for where you are at that moment. But I think I see more commonly, a viral moment happening and a label's expecting another viral hit or publishers expecting another viral hit. And you can't really deliver that, right? Because you haven't really done this for a long time. So it's true. Sometimes you might feel like it's time to cash in right now, but even if you do, it's time to go back to the drawing board before you even consider LOMO. Like, I think the precursor to LOMO is leverage, right? You want to have as much leverage as possible going into any negotiation. Sometimes you don't have it, but I would tell you leverage is the equalizer.
Interesting. So having leverage is important. Not necessarily being a flash in the pan, so to speak, is important, it seems, as well. Shifting the emphasis a little bit here, because there were so many folks that were interested in ownership, I wanted to ask about that concept for a second. So does entering into a publishing deal, a traditional publishing deal, mean that the writer in question is relinquishing ownership to their catalog, or are they just kind of like assigning their rights to the publishing company for a period of time?
Yeah, in a co-pub deal, and right where you said co-pub, not admin, correct? Right?
Yeah, in a publishing deal.
Yeah, in a pub deal, normally you're assigning, I would say, up until recently, you're assigning 50% of the copyright forever, right? I mean, like I think that's kind of what's happening at that moment. However, more so recently, you're starting to see reversions, right? So reversions are a reassignment of the copyright back to the original copyright holder, right? So if you are a songwriter and you do a pub deal with a major pub company, normally, back in the day, that ownership would just be transferred forever. But now there's a reversion, and more often there's a reversion. So that's something you want to negotiate, but you are assigning your copyright forever.
So let's assume that I have a reversion. That would, I would assume, mean that I have to fulfill some level of obligation or obligations in order for my rights to revert. Is that true?
Yes, recoupment is the word that you'll always use in every single probably music deal you'll ever do, right? Whether it be a record deal, pub deal, songwriter deal, producer deal, recoupment. Recoupment is making back the money that was given to you. So oftentimes you're not going to get a reversion. Like, no company is going to give you your copyright back if you haven't made the money back, right? And normally it's not even based on making the money back. It's also making the money back plus a little bit, right? Because we're all business. We all try to be business people. Our goal in business is not to break even. Our goal in business is to make a little money. So reversions are usually tied to recoupment.
They're usually tied to recoupment, but aren't, and correct me if I'm wrong, but are there other situations that I might encounter as a songwriter where, in addition to recouping my advance and then some, I'm also responsible for delivering X number of hits that get cut on like major label releases? Like, are there any other strings attached to the deal that may mean that it prolongs the reversion period or maybe locks me into the deal longer than I was anticipating being in that deal for?
Yeah, it could be the classic MDRC, minimum delivery release commitment. And that's based on the amount of songs that are released during that time. So it might say 100%, right? That's like sometimes what you'll see. You'll have to do 100% songs. So if I have 25% publishing on one song, say on a particular album, I have 4 cuts and I have 25% on each. You add those up, that equals 100%. So if it says 100%, that means you need, 800% publishing on a bunch of records, right? So MDRCs are tough to defeat. You don't really see them too much anymore. You'll see, but a lot of your favorite producers, songwriters, they dealt with that stuff.
Interesting. So hypothetical question then for you, because, um, well, actually, before I get to that question, on the topic of ownership, I think that I oftentimes encounter folks that find it difficult to differentiate a traditional publishing administrator from a traditional publishing deal. So, I mean, is it true that these companies provide the same basic services, or are they fundamentally different?
Um, Fundamentally different, right? I think, um, I think each publishing company is literally going to offer something. They're going to sell you on different things. Each deal, they're going to sell you on something different, right? So a pub company might have access to maybe the best soundtracks out there, right? They might say, hey, we handle these soundtracks. Another publishing company might have a really strong collection society, right? I think everybody's going to offer sort of different things, and you actually got to do your research and figure out, who's actually telling the truth and who actually can offer certain things.
Interesting. So again, on the topic of ownership, one of the things that we've been reading a lot about of late are these fancy, splashy, like acquisition deals by people like Sting or Bruce Springsteen or Bob Dylan, and the list goes on and on. You mentioned something earlier that I thought was striking in terms of, the old way of doing publishing deals in which the publisher was assigned or basically had the rights retention on the catalog in question in perpetuity. So, like, can you shine a little bit more light on how that differs from an acquisition deal if I'm selling my rights versus assigning something in perpetuity?
Yeah, I mean, I think in a lot of ways it's pretty much the same. It's just a different time, at different time points, right? Usually when you're doing a co-pub deal, you're doing that in the beginning of your career or fairly early in your career, right? Most people don't tend to sign co-pub deals 10, 15 years into their career, at least now. That's something you do sort of early in your career. You need to get some money in your pocket. You're looking to generate more opportunities. That's sort of what happens. When these catalog sales that you're seeing, those are usually reserved historically for people with attractive catalogs with a lot of hits, a lot of depth, and they've got their royalties back or their publishing back, right? So let's kind of talk about again what we established earlier, right? The different types of pub deals. In a co-pub deal, they might have 50% left of their copyright, right? So if they have 50% of their copyright, that means they're going to only sell that catalog with that 50%, right? So I think you got to understand that if you don't have ownership long term, then you're not going to be in the catalog selling business. Your record companies, your pub companies, going to be able to do that, not you. So I think that's like the benefit of reversion and the different type of deal structures out there, admin, co-pub. You want to make sure that you can probably participate in a catalog sale.
Got it. So if I'm sort of catching the vibe, so to speak, as to what you're saying, it sounds like I have to be really careful about what I'm doing with my catalog really at every phase of my career, because it's not only about like building the value and having that value sustained and collecting money over a period of years. It's also about like what I'll retain rights to, what I'm relinquishing, what I may get back, and thinking about things as if I were a small business. It seems to be of paramount concern with what you're saying, and I guess what folks on the call should keep in mind. Switching gears a little bit, because oftentimes what I encounter are folks that are looking for a big advance without necessarily understanding the strings attached to that advance and the obligations that deal may require as a result of accepting a big advance. So I'm curious, are there any downsides to accepting a big advance?
Yeah, the key word is recoupment, right? And I think the recoupment is the key word. The bigger the advance, the harder it is to recoup. And I don't want to scare anyone, but I'll say publishing is a very radio and hit driven business, right? I think the way you can sort of equalize radio play and hits is to have a deep catalog, right? A lot of cuts, making a good amount of money. That's kind of the way to equalize it. But if you don't have radio hits or massive hits, it's going to be hard to pay back 300K, 400K, 500K. Just because one, I don't want to go too deep in a rabbit hole. Public streaming royalties don't really benefit publishing yet. There is some that's coming from streaming, but it's not equal. The record labels get more than publishers from the streaming side. So these big massive streaming records, they will contribute to your publishing success, but anyone in publishing will tell you radio matters, big hits matter. So it's really, really tough to recoup a massive advance. And the goal is to work through your deal. I don't think anyone wants to be in a deal forever. LOMO, that strategy is really about putting these things in priority, right? Length, obligation, money, ownership. You don't need to necessarily you just need to know you need to prioritize those things, but two, you really just need to know you need to make sure that long term you can go where you need to go.
Got it. So basically it sounds as though if I accept a big advance, I might be shooting myself in the foot because it's going to be hard to recoup, which doesn't necessarily leave me in a good position in the near term or in the long term. So I guess what you're saying then is I shouldn't necessarily equate a larger publishing advance with the publisher believing in me more, right? Like if one is offering a smaller advance, it doesn't mean that they believe in me less, does it?
Not at all. I would say, it's all about deal structures, right? Because I think, an admin company, if they're giving advances, might be offering you a less advance, right? Just because they have a different interest in your copyright. So if you're a co-pub company, they're going to own something. So likely they're going to say, hey, we'll give you more money because this is a long-term investment. But if you're choosing an admin company, they're going to say, hey, we don't own this thing long-term, so we can't even give you the same amount of money that a co-pub company is going to give you. We only can give you, a little bit less. So doesn't necessarily mean that they don't like you as much. It just means that the deal's different. And oftentimes, if you look under the hood, that company offering you maybe less of an advance has a little bit more favorable terms, right? They might have a better length. Might have a softer obligation, and they might be giving you ownership. But you know what? Money might be the last thing that might be the last priority for them.
Got it. So, on the topic of advances, and we were talking a little bit about acquisitions, and I think that it can be a little, you could feel disillusioned as a songwriter if all of a sudden people are offering you a $500,000 advance or offering you $1 million advance. It's like, how do they even know what I'm worth, right? I mean, and why are the numbers so different? I mean, if you don't have somebody to look underneath the hood and ask those qualifying questions, how do you make sense of it all? And so if you can speak a little bit more about how the value is derived, right? Because I think a lot of the people on the call have, they may only be with a performing rights organization as an example, but they haven't done much else. So where do these numbers come from, and how do I know what it's worth at the end of the day?
Oh man, that's such a great question. And I think if you're only collecting from your PRO, like your ASCAP BMI, and if you're international right now, PRS or whatever companies doing that collection, you're not collecting enough of your royalties, flat out, right? You're only collecting a small piece of the pie. So that's the first thing. Secondly, when you're thinking about publishing royalties out there, you're thinking about your performance royalties, right? That's from your PRO, and you're thinking about your mechanical royalty, right? And the mechanical in 2021 is coming mostly from streaming, right? And every time a song stream There's a performance royalty that's created, and there is a mechanical royalty that's created and paid out. And that's where the money's coming from. So you can, I know Song Trust has a calculator, and I know maybe a couple other companies have a calculator, right? You could put the song in, and they'll go and try to get as much data as possible, and they'll kind of pump out a number of what publishing royalties are available for that song. But really, if the song's doing really well on radio, you should be thinking, all right, there's a lot of money to be made. If a song's streaming super heavy, then there's another. That's another one, right? So there's no fine tune. There's no exact way to calculate, but there are tools out there. Songtrust has a great tool, and I believe a couple other the estimator, royalty estimator. So I would start there.
Okay, it is true, that Songtrust has a publicly facing royalty estimator tool, and it serves as one of the big hooks that draws a lot of traffic to our website, no doubt. But, at the end of the day, that seems to entail that I'm partnering with a company. And, and because I'm only with a performing rights organization, and maybe I don't know so much about publishing or the roles that administrators play, it's kind of like, well, what makes the most sense for me and what can I do by myself? So is it true that there's a certain amount of stuff that I can do without the intervention or assistance of a publishing administrator? And is it true as well that it would probably serve me well in the near term and the long term to make sure that all my works are properly registered if perhaps I don't mind handling administration on my own? You know what I'm talking about? Can you speak to that a little bit more concretely as well?
Yeah, there's always going to be a limit on self-administration, right? Some people don't like to hear that because they think there's a way around it. But, unless you're going to go to South Korea and register your music, Germany, England, the list goes on and on. When you think of collection, you got to think of global collection, not just homeland collection, right? So if you're an American citizen and you want to collect your U.S. based performance royalties and mechanical royalties, you can do that, right? I mean, ASCAP BMI, the Mechanical Licensing Collective, a new entity that's government ran, and you can sign up for free and start collecting your mechanical royalties in the U.S. But those are just U.S. things, right? Like, so much of music now is a global sport. Streams are being generated all across the globe, so you don't want to be able. It's cool to collect your American royalties or your U.S. royalties, but global collection is super important.
Global collection is super important. And to an extent, that's kind of where Songtrust fills a void, because as Carl was alluding to, it's extremely difficult to collect royalties overseas when you're relying exclusively on local collection organizations to try to pocket what's yours. But nevertheless, it and Carl, correct me if I'm wrong here, but am I in a better position if I ultimately want to, let's say that I have an intention of partnering with a traditional music publishing company, but I'm trying to understand how I'm going to get the most advantageous deal. Part of what I think is confusing for a lot of folks is that, using ASCAP as a prime example, there are writer share royalties and publishing share royalties. And so am I going to be in a better position if I'm registering my titles and I'm self-published, I created my content, I own my own content, to collect on both ends of the spectrum? Or should I just leave the publishing information unaccounted for until I'm actively shopping for a deal?
Yeah, I mean, that's you kind of just answered the question. If you're actively shopping for a deal, then maybe you want to leave those publishing royalties untouched, because then you get to say, hey, I got these royalties untouched, give me this amount of advance, times X because I got these money sitting here and I kind of know, what's out there for me. So that might be your strategy. But, ultimately, I think being a musician in a early stage company, which I think a lot of songwriters and producers, kind of are, is, I think the more money you can have in pocket, the less you have to even worry about, going to take a massive advance that will cripple your, long-term leverage or might make your situation a little crazy. So I think, oftentimes I would register the music if I had a substantial amount of money for ASCAP and BMI, just because I wouldn't necessarily be relying on an advance from a massive company. I don't think that's the best way to sort of build a business if you don't have to. Often it can accelerate things. It might be an option for you, but if you don't have to take the money, and you can build in a longer, steady, more consistent fashion, I probably think that's better for you.
Well, that's a really interesting concept. If you don't need the money, then then maybe it isn't necessarily in your best interest to accept a big upfront advance. I wanted to ask your opinion on the roles that publishers play in the creative world, right? Let's say that I'm an artist who's also a songwriter, and I'm signed to Atlantic Records. And let's say that Atlantic Records are actively pitching me for sync, and they've had some success in landing some lucrative syncs for me. They also have been successful in getting me placements on other records with big artists and things. Is it necessarily in my best interest to partner with a publisher that's providing the same basic services? Or could it actually be to my detriment if there's a publisher that's duplicating a lot of the same efforts that my label may be involved with?
Yeah. I don't know. I wouldn't look at it as a double negative. I think certain things are really hard to get, right? A sync is like a super hard to get. Getting on a popular soundtrack, getting on NBA 2K, getting on Madden. Those are like very, very difficult opportunities. I think you're better off having two parties, fighting for you. I just think that's, you want to increase your odds. So, well, you might say, hey, I have such a good partner on that side that, I'm not seeking a sync partner on the publishing side. I'm looking for someone who maybe specializes more in collection and technology. I want to know where my royalties are at. I want to have a pure accounting statement. I really want to go with a company that I know can collect my royalties, globally. That's what you might say on the pub side. But again, I think when you think about the most elusive things that people seek, sync is one of them. I think it's very hard to get a very good sync license. I'm sure everybody in this conversation would love to get a sync on Euphoria, right? Or whatever your favorite show is, and it's very coveted.
It certainly is coveted, and it's also a bit like catching lightning in a bottle. So God bless everybody that manages to get a lucrative sync on Euphoria. Last question before we start getting into the Q&A portion of our discussion here. I wanted your opinion about retention periods. So, what does a retention period mean as far as a publishing deal is concerned, and why should I consider the length of a retention period in my evaluation of the publishing landscape?
Yeah, retention is super, super important because one, it gets to kind of speak on how long a publisher has to make money off your copyright, right? And if it's 10 years, that's probably fine because, and fine is that maybe that's my estimate based on the money that was giving and the company involved. That might work for you, but again, we kind of talked about maybe catalog sales and sort of long-term plays with your catalog. You don't want that retention period or reversion period to start hitting 20, 30 years, because then you start losing that leverage to maybe go out there one day and say, hey, I want to sell this thing while it's still making a lot of money, and I might be able to get 20, 30x on it. So you always want to think long-term about it. A retention period longer than 10 or longer than 10, 15 years, there's some real downside there. But again, if you're patient, maybe that's something you're saying, hey, I wouldn't plan on selling my catalog anyway for 20 years. But I think catalog sales, sort of, you think about your family, what you want to pass on, those sort of things come into play when you're talking about, retention period and reversion.
Okay, well, with all of that discussion, it's now time to shift to some of these incredibly detailed and interesting questions here. Um, this one from Christian, I think, is kind of interesting, actually. Christian Farad. It's addressed to you, Carl, and it has to do with whether I encounter this all the time because I'm interacting with songwriters and producers, and also the attorneys that represent them. And and as I'm sure many of the folks on this call know full well, like SongTrust offers a standard deal, and that's going to work for a lot of people. But the reality is that our scope is extremely narrow, and so this concept of an advance, which is basically outside the scope of what we can do, becomes a bit of a sticking point at times. So, do you feel? I'm going to augment this a little bit. This gentleman mentions attorneys being motivated to get a big advance in an upfront deal. I don't know if that's necessarily the case, but I guess, do you feel more so that it's ultimately in an attorney's best interest to steer people in the right direction based on the top of mind concerns and priorities of their client? Or have you seen people that are I guess led in the direction of getting a big advance because, I don't know, they may have been suggested to do so by somebody who is an advisor?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's normally a combination of both, right? I have clients who, no matter what I tell them, I think they'd still take the big advance because that's just what they want at that time. So, you give them your spiel and you let them know, maybe this is how you need to look at it. Here are the facts, but ultimately, sometimes they have their mind made up. And the flip side, maybe there's an attorney or a law firm. At the end of the day, everybody, is trying to make a little bit of money. They're kind of pushing the deal to go through because they know, that's their time to get paid. So I think objectively, one, you want a team that's going to think about you and your interests first, right? And if you ever feel like there's a conflict there, you need a new team or a new advisor. But really the best, I think, in going to these types of workshops, looking at a lot of SongTrust educational materials, to even have a firm and solid opinion on some of this stuff, you're going to have a baseline knowledge of publishing and pub deals, where you're at, and being honest with yourself. So I think it's always a totality of the circumstances. That's the way I put it.
Cool. This is from Jillian Ferguson, related to sync. The question is, if we own publishing on certain titles and a colleague wants to place one of those titles in a sync agreement for a TV or film show or film production, excuse me, what is the typical split for finding and executing this license agreement? I would imagine that a lot of that is negotiated within the contracts themselves. Is that right, Carl, or am I mistaken?
Right. You're saying like a song gets placed on a TV show or a movie or something like that?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, generally speaking, there it is negotiable, but like whatever they offer is pretty much, they have a budget that's set, and whatever gets paid on one side usually gets paid on the other side. So, for a movie soundtrack, you gotta clear it on both sides. It's not just about the publishing, it's about the record labels too, and the master. So whatever the master got, the publisher is going to get. Whatever the publisher got, the master is usually going to get. That's kind of how it works. We call that term MFN, most favored nations. But there's no one size fit all. Each movie, each soundtrack, each TV show has a different budget, and depending on how that song is used in that particular spot, is going to determine sort of what the payout is for it.
Got it. Talking about work for hire contracts. So Diego Felix asks, do original authors ever retain their publishing, Or is it typical that original authors sign away both their master and composition ownership rights in a work for hire contract?
A bit of a loaded question, I would say, just because I would need to know more about what a particular contract says. But generally speaking, a work for hire is, quite frankly, a work for hire. So it'll usually say what they're at. If they're asking for the mass sound recording and the underlying composition, then it's a work for hire for both, right? If they're only saying one, then the other side is usually not part of the work for hire. You have to look at what they're asking for in that particular work for hire, but each agreement is different, right? I mean, I'm not going to be able to give you a specific answer on work for hire contracts unless I saw it.
Bouncing back to the sync end of the spectrum for a hot second here. So Christopher De Laurenti asks, why are good sync licenses so hard to obtain? Is it a question of access to music supervisors, buyouts, or ... question mark?
Why are music supervisors so hard to obtain?
No, why are good sync licenses so hard to obtain? I can answer part of this as well, I think, but yeah. You can chime in first.
Yeah, I mean, one, there's probably already a sense of what a particular show or movie is looking for, right? So I mean, like, if there's a dark scene, they probably have an idea of what that music is looking for. Same with a TV show, so that's part of it. But a lot of soundtracks are sort of given to specific companies, right? Like I know a couple pub companies that sort of run a couple song soundtracks for movies, right? And then those pub companies are going to use only their clients the stuff. So there's a bit of that, and it's just really hard to get a sync. Everyone's trying to go through. Everybody wants it.
Yeah, and I think to add a little bit more to the equation here, I think that also the problem is that it's a saturated market with people that are trying to pitch for those spots. The fact of the matter is, because I used to work in that world at a production music library, which happened to be very adamant about maintaining fees at a certain level, it seemed like there was a race to the bottom, basically, with people that were looking to essentially enter into these gratis licensing deals where they were giving their stuff away for free. Basically, they were licensing it for whatever ad spot or TV show in question it was that wanted to use their music, and then they would be pocketing money on the back end based on performance activity related to that sync deal, which you'd receive through an ASCAP or a BMI. But the reality is there are a lot of really good music creators that may not be the most business savvy of the bunch, so to speak, and they may not have a problem fundamentally with giving their music away on a gratis deal. And that's who you're up against. So if it comes down to production values and the production values are more or less the same, it could be more attractive to somebody to say, well, I can get this for free as opposed to paying $10,000 for something. So that's also the reality, I think, that a lot of folks are up against. And it unfortunately, it can drive down the price of the sync.
Yeah, I'll add one more thing and say I think you have a better shot now than, in my opinion, than ever, just because so much new media is popping up. You think about how many streaming services are out there creating original content. That wasn't always the case, right? So kind of what Alex is talking about, the sync might not be as lucrative just because the opportunities are so endless. But I think there's from a actual creation standpoint, I actually think more stuff is being created right now, meaning there's more opportunity for sync. But then again, there's probably also less eyes. So there's all sorts of equations that you need to pay attention to.
Yeah, there was a question here that I'm unable to find who submitted it, but it had to do with reciprocal agreements and international collection, and I feel that it's important to address that because it is true, and I'm just going to take this one. So it is true that if you're with an ASCAP or a BMI, that you're entitling that PRO to not only collect domestic performance revenue, which is kind of like a blanket term that's used to describe revenue related to performances of music in a television show after it gets licensed via sync deal, or radio performances, or live performances at Madison Square Garden or other big venues like that. The thing is that one of the nice things about partnering with a BMI or an ASCAP is that all of these societies have reciprocal agreements with like non-US societies, basically with, the PRSs of England, which is basically the ASCAP of England, or SOCAN of Canada, which is like the BMI of Canada. The list goes on and on. So what happens oftentimes is that you're going to find evidence of foreign money that's paid back to your home society as a result of the foreign society basically doing or performing the same function that BMI and ASCAP are performing at the local level. But the problem is that there are unfortunately some gaps that folks will see in relation to what's actually reported for foreign performance and maybe what isn't. And because there are gaps in what's reported, you really need to go over with a fine-tooth comb to see what's being reported and what isn't, because if you're not, then you're probably going to do yourself a disservice. The only real way that you can guarantee plugging all the holes and making sure that the puzzle pieces are fitting together and that you're actually able to collect money to which you're entitled is if there's a company that's literally out there on the prowl registering your titles in every society in the world. And as basic as it sounds, kind of like how it works at BMI and ASCAP, I used to deal on a pretty frequent basis with callers that would curse me out because they would have a big hit on terrestrial radio 10 or 12 years prior, and they never registered their song, or they never were entitled party on the song. And as a result, because there's this thing called black box royalties, we didn't get into, but black box royalties is a real thing. And every single society has a different retroactive collection window that they're able to effectively honor to account for periods where you miss receiving money. And if you miss the mark and you fail to register your titles at ASCAP or BMI, they're only going to go back about a year or something like that. I think it's like 9 months with BMI, about a year and a half with ASCAP to retroactively account for periods that you missed. So you're going to lose your money. The same school of thought applies internationally. It's kind of a basic concept, but basically, if there's no registration that exists in a society's database, you're not going to get your money. And so it's kind of hard to quantify what that looks like in real dollars and cents, but it's a real thing. And something that I encounter, I think that probably, Carl, you encounter this as well, are producers and artists and publishers that have music that's being performed or consumed everywhere in the universe, all over the place. And it's a beautiful thing to get your music available on distribution, and DSPs and whatnot in Latin America and in Asia and all these other markets. But it's another thing to actually make sure that you're collecting all that money to which you're entitled. And the only way to do that is to have registrations at the societies that have like jurisdiction over a certain territory, or else you're going to lose your money. And then furthermore, ASCAP and BMI only collect performance money. They don't collect your mechanical money. So if you're getting huge streams on like Spotify or Apple Music, and you're relying exclusively on BMI and ASCAP, you're losing a good chunk of your money. Usually my clients are people that are like streaming success stories that have, maybe hundreds of millions, if not north of 1 billion streams. And like 2/3 of their money is mechanical money, which you're not going to be able to get through BMI and ASCAP. And that's part of the reason why using a publishing admin, whether it's Songtrust or somebody else, is ultimately in your best interest. I know that we're winding down on time here. And there's still so many interesting questions. I may have time for one more. I'm going to scope out the scene here. Sorry, give me one moment. Maybe it'll be another sync question here. So, because we didn't actually talk about this, but it's in relation to sync agencies. This is from Dave Tatlock. I'm so confused when sync agents want to keep my publishing. Does that only apply to the sync or to the song elsewhere? Do you have much? I have a little experience with that, Carl, but have you seen that ever in your career?
Yeah, I have, and I think it kind of comes down to whether maybe a particular song was created in particular, for a certain sync or for that agency. If you gave them, say, you gave them exclusively 4 or 5 songs, for them to sort of go out there and pitch. I mean, maybe that's the only situation that I've seen that sort of sync agency sort of acts for sort of any ownership in a song, but generally speaking, I would stay away from that. I think, the way they would eat is, if a certain song is synced, then they get a percentage, right? I mean, like, anything else I think is a bit, overreaching.
Yeah, I mean, what I've seen frequently is that if you're partnered with a sync agency, and there's some very legitimate ones that operate this way, is they may license your song for a Simpsons episode or something, and the idea is that they want to put themselves in a position to pocket back end revenue based on performance activity of that episode that they licensed your music for, every single time that that episode airs, which seems to make sense to me. I think that that's fair. And the way that they'll do that is they oftentimes will re-register your song and ask after BMI and add a tag to it. So it may be like 123-AX or something. And that's a way for them to differentiate like what they license versus the main title of what the song is actually called. And then it's the tagged version with that thing that I just read off, that's added to a cue sheet that enables them to collect the back end revenue, but it's only exclusive to that spot that they licensed or to that TV show that they licensed. I personally have not seen instances where a publisher, if they like license your song once, they get all of your publishing. That seems sort of draconian to me. So if there's anyone that has been subject to that, it's probably worth further investigation. But that seems pretty hardcore as far as I'm concerned, and ultimately not so fair to whoever it is that actually created the music. I think we have time for one more question, and we're getting deluged with lots of interesting questions by lots of interested parties here. I've got one from John Bryant. How do video games pay publishing and songwriter royalties? And does the MLC collect any of that video game publishing money?
Yeah, I would think mostly, when you think of like a video game sync, they're paying for usage, right? So anytime, if I have a song on the 2K soundtrack, you're just getting
it's a lot of money up front, right? It's like, we'll give you 10,000, whatever it is, and then you don't really get residual money oftentimes, right? Or no?
Yeah, you're getting an upfront fee for specific usage. You pay a certain percent to the of that upfront fee to the master side, and a certain percent to the publishing side. That tends to be it. But it is set out for a specific usage, right? So if they want to use, usually drawn out in that sync agreement, that usage might say, hey, we could use this song for this edition of the game in any format. But then, some agreements might say like, hey, we could use this song. We're going to give you guys $30K to use the song in all 2K NBA 2Ks forever. So it's usually spelled out, but they're all upfront fees. That's the way that's the way sort of video games work. No royalties yet.
We have 3 minutes. I'm going to do one more from Solomon Collins. How do you pass on your publishing rights to your kids, or I guess other family members, after you pass? Have you done any sort of like estate planning in that regard, Carl, with any of the clients that you've worked with?
Yeah, I mean, it's just a will, just an estate. You literally, while you're alive, that's just another thing that you're putting in your will or your estate that you're directing to a certain person. So that could be your kid, your wife, your grandma, your mom, whatever your will spells out. But that's just estate planning. And what happens if you don't do that? That's sort of estate and probate law, right? There's no one answer to that, but the best way to get ahead of that is to draw up your will, draw up your estate, and make sure that it's going to the right people.
And in our closing minute here, there are there are certain forms, certainly if you're with an ASCAP or BMI, they have tried and true and very buttoned up systems and processes in place for processing what are called deceased matters inquiries, where they're essentially passing through any royalties that the original music creator created, and making sure that that money is routed to the proper place. And that could be to, an heir, it could be sometimes to a charity. It varies, obviously, depending upon the wishes of whoever it is that is the deceased individual. But it happens all the time, with ASCAP and BMI, and certainly, thinking about how you're passing on your revenue is important, because let's face it, publishing royalties are the closest thing to, whether it's a pension plan or, it's the closest thing that music creators have to, having some sort of protection financially over many, many years to come. So you definitely want to make sure that you're taking care of that whenever the time comes. That is it. That is the crowning touch on our hour-long discussion about publishing contracts, about when to enter into deals, maybe when to hold off. The LOMO strategy is super, super important. Definitely want to keep that in consideration whenever you're factoring in whether or not to do a deal or hold off on a deal. Let me just leave by saying that you always want to keep into consideration like what your top of mind priorities are. And if it's, A&R or sync, or if it's royalty collection, or if it's getting a big advance, there is no like one tried and true right answer. So just be mindful of what it is that you need, and make sure that you're adhering to those guiding principles, and you'll ultimately make the right decision. And that's it. Thank you, everybody.